My hands are shaking as I record this. Not because I'm old, though I am. 80 years old with bones that creak like an ancient wooden door. But because I've carried this story inside me for 6 decades, and the weight of it has finally become heavier than the fear of telling it. They told me to stay quiet. My mother told me. My husband told me. My own children told me. Why dig up the past, Ma? Why ruin everyone's peace? But whose peace are we protecting? Because it was never mine. My peace was stolen from me when I was 19 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled like burned rice and broken promises, wearing a wedding dress I never chose. So here I am, Margaret Ellen Whitfield, 80 years old, sitting in a small apartment in Savannah, Georgia, with nothing left to lose and everything left to say. If you're listening to this, I need you to understand something before I begin. I'm not telling you this story for sympathy. I don't want your pity. I've had enough of that to last 3 lifetimes. I'm telling you this because somewhere out there's a woman, maybe she's 20, maybe she's 50, who is living the life I lived, smiling the smile I smiled, and dying the slow death I almost died. And maybe, just maybe, my voice can reach her before it's too late. I was born in 1946 in a tiny farmhouse outside of Macon, Georgia. The kind of house where the walls were thin enough to hear your parents arguing and thick enough to pretend you didn't. My father, Earl Whitfield, was a tobacco farmer with hands like leather and a temper like a summer storm, quiet one moment, devastating the next. My mother, Doris, was the most beautiful woman I ever saw and the saddest person I ever knew. She had these green eyes that looked like they were always about to cry, even when she was laughing. I was the youngest of 4. My brothers, James, Robert, and Thomas, they were my whole world. James, the oldest, used to carry me on his shoulders through the tobacco fields and tell me stories about faraway places he'd read about in library books. He'd say, "Maggie, one day you and me, we're gonna see the ocean." I believed him with every cell in my body. We were poor. Not the kind of poor where you struggle. The kind of poor where struggle is all you know, so you don't even realize there's another way to live. We had 1 pair of shoes each, and mine always had holes in the toes because Mama said girls' feet didn't matter as much as boys' feet because boys had to work the fields. I remember thinking, even at 6 years old, that didn't seem right, but I kept my mouth shut. That was the first lesson I learned. Keep your mouth shut, Margaret. School was my sanctuary. I loved reading more than anything in this world. My teacher, Mrs. Calloway, she was the first person who ever told me I was smart. Not pretty, not useful, not obedient, smart. She gave me a copy of Little Women when I was 9, and I read it so many times the spine cracked and the pages turned yellow. Jo March became my best friend. She was brave and loud and unapologetic, everything I was too scared to be. When I was 12, something happened that changed the shape of my entire life, though I wouldn't understand how until decades later. James enlisted in the Army. He was 18, tall and proud, and he stood in our kitchen with his uniform on and said, "I'll be back before you know it, Maggie, and when I come back, we'll go see that ocean." He hugged me so tight I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek. That was the last time I ever felt truly safe. James never came back. They sent a telegram 6 months later, "Killed in action." My mother collapsed on the kitchen floor and didn't get up for 3 days. My father went out to the barn and didn't come back for a week. And me, I sat on the porch with that copy of Little Women and read the same page over and over because the words had stopped making sense. Everything had stopped making sense. After James died, my father decided that the best thing for our family was to secure alliances with other farming families. That's what he called it, alliances. Like we were countries at war instead of people trying to survive. When I was 17, he introduced me to Harold Pemberton. Harold was 32, owned a cotton farm 3 times the size of ours, and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "He's a good man," my mother whispered to me in the kitchen. "A stable man. You'll want for nothing." I wanted to scream at her. I want to go to college. I want to be a teacher. I want to see the ocean like James promised. But I looked at her face, those green eyes, so tired, so defeated, and I kept my mouth shut. Second lesson learned. We were married on a Saturday in June 1965. I was 19. The dress was my mother's, altered to fit my smaller frame. The flowers were from Harold's garden. The vows were traditional. Love, honor, and obey. I said every word, and I meant none of them. Is that a terrible thing to admit? Maybe, but I've spent 60 years lying, and I promised myself that today, on this recording, I would only tell the truth. The first year of marriage taught me things no young woman should have to learn. Harold wasn't cruel in the way you see in movies. There were no dramatic fights, no thrown dishes, no screaming matches. His cruelty was quieter than that. It was in the way he'd correct my grammar in front of guests, the way he'd look at my cooking and say, "My mother made it better, but I suppose this will do." The way he'd go silent for days if I said something he disagreed with, until I'd apologize for having an opinion at all. He controlled the money. He controlled who I could see. He controlled what I wore, what I read, what I thought. And the worst part, the very worst part, is that he did it all with a smile. To the outside world, Harold Pemberton was a pillar of the community, a church deacon, a generous neighbor, a devoted husband. Nobody knew that behind closed doors I was disappearing. Piece by piece, year by year, I was becoming invisible. My children saved me. Or maybe they delayed me. I'm still not sure which. My daughter Catherine was born in 1967, my son William in 1970, and my youngest, little Anna, in 1974. 3 beautiful reasons to keep going. 3 beautiful chains keeping me in a life I never chose. I poured everything I had into those children. Every dream I'd abandoned, every hope I'd buried, I planted in them like seeds. I read to them every night, not just children's books, but real literature. Shakespeare, Dickens, Austen. Catherine would fall asleep to the sound of my voice, reading Pride and Prejudice, and I'd keep reading anyway, just for myself, just to remember that somewhere inside this farmer's wife, there was still a woman who loved words. Harold didn't approve of the reading. "You're filling their heads with nonsense," he'd say. "Catherine doesn't need books. She needs to learn to keep a house." But this was the one thing, the only thing, I fought him on. I never raised my voice. I never argued. I just kept reading, night after night after night. It was my tiny, silent rebellion, and it kept me alive. When Catherine was 10, she came home from school and said, "Mama, my teacher says I'm the best reader in the whole class." And I cried, right there in the kitchen, with dinner burning on the stove. I cried like I hadn't cried since James died, because someone had finally told my daughter what Mrs. Calloway had told me all those years ago. You are smart. And unlike me, Catherine was going to get the chance to do something with it. The moment everything changed was a Tuesday in October 1989. I remember it was a Tuesday because Harold always played cards with his friends on Tuesdays, which meant I had the house to myself for a few hours. I was 43 years old, and those Tuesday evenings were the only time I felt like I could breathe. That particular Tuesday, I was cleaning out the attic when I found a box I'd never seen before. It was tucked behind old Christmas decorations, sealed with packing tape. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Letters addressed to me from my brother Robert, from my college friend Shirley, from Mrs. Calloway, all opened, all read, and none of them ever delivered to me. Harold had been intercepting my mail for 24 years. I sat on that dusty attic floor and read every single letter. Robert had written to tell me about his life in California, begging me to visit. Shirley had gotten a teaching degree and wanted to know if I'd be her roommate in Atlanta. Mrs. Calloway had written to say she'd secured a scholarship for me at the state college. A full scholarship, everything paid for. That letter was dated 1964, 1 year before I married Harold. 1 year before my life took the turn it took. I could have gone to college. I could have been a teacher. I could have seen the ocean. And Harold knew. He knew, and he hid it from me. And he let me believe that I had no options, no future, no way out. The man I'd shared a bed with for 24 years had stolen my life and hidden the evidence in a box in the attic. Something broke inside me that night. Not my heart, that had broken years ago. Something deeper. The part of me that had been trained to stay quiet, to accept, to endure. That part shattered like glass on a stone floor, and in its place something new began to grow, something that felt a lot like rage. I didn't leave right away. I couldn't. I had no money, no job skills, no credit history. Harold had made sure of that. But I had something he didn't know about. I had Catherine, my brilliant, fierce, college-educated daughter who had just graduated from law school. I called her the next morning and told her everything. Every single thing. 24 years of silence, broken in one phone call. Catherine drove from Atlanta to our farm in 3 hours. She walked into that house like a storm. My quiet, bookish girl had become a force of nature. She looked at Harold sitting in his armchair and said, "My mother is leaving you today. You can make this easy or you can make this hard. But either way, she's leaving." Harold laughed, actually laughed. He said, "Your mother doesn't have the spine for that." And that's when I walked down those stairs with my suitcase in one hand and that box of stolen letters in the other. I looked at the man who had controlled every moment of my existence for nearly a quarter century, and I said the first honest words I'd spoken in my marriage. "You were wrong about me, Harold. You were always wrong about me." The divorce took 2 years. Harold fought it with everything he had. He told the church I was abandoning my vows. He told the neighbors I'd lost my mind. He told William and Anna that I was tearing the family apart. William believed him. That's a wound that still hasn't healed, and I suspect it never will. But Anna, sweet, stubborn Anna, she stood by me. She said, "Mama, you should have done this 20 years ago." She was right. At 45 years old, I started my life over. Catherine helped me rent a small apartment in Savannah. I got a job at the public library. Can you imagine? Me, the girl who loved books more than anything, finally surrounded by them every day. The pay was nothing. The apartment was tiny. I ate soup for dinner most nights, and I was happier than I had ever been in my entire life. I got my GED at 46. I enrolled in community college at 47. I earned my associate degree at 49. And at 51 years old, Margaret Ellen Whitfield walked across a stage at Savannah State University and received a bachelor's degree in English literature. Catherine, Anna, and my granddaughter Sophie were in the front row, crying and cheering. It was the proudest moment of my life. I became a teacher, a high school English teacher, just like Mrs. Calloway. For 15 years, I stood in front of classrooms full of teenagers who didn't want to be there, and I told them what she told me. You are smart. You matter. Your voice matters. I gave copies of Little Women to every girl who reminded me of myself, the quiet ones, the scared ones, the ones who kept their mouths shut because someone had taught them that was safer. When I was 65, I retired from teaching, and the first thing I did, the very first thing, was drive to Tybee Island. It's only 20 minutes from Savannah, but I'd never been. In 80 years of living in Georgia, I had never seen the ocean. I parked my car, took off my shoes, and walked across the sand until the water touched my toes. It was cold. It was November. I didn't care. I stood there with the waves pulling at my feet and the wind whipping my gray hair, and I talked to James. I said, "I made it, Big Brother. I finally made it. And I swear on everything I am, I felt him there. I felt him standing right beside me, tall and proud in his army uniform, smiling that smile that could light up the whole state of Georgia. I cried so hard that day that a stranger came over to check on me. A young woman, couldn't have been more than 25. She said, "Ma'am, are you all right? Can I call someone for you?" And I laughed through my tears and said, "Sweetheart, I'm not sad. I'm just 60 years late." William came back to me. It took 15 years, but he came back. He showed up at my apartment one Sunday morning with flowers and red eyes and said, "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry." He'd found out the truth about his father, all of it. The letters, the control, the lies. Harold had done the same thing to William's wife, and it wasn't until William watched his own marriage crumble that he finally understood what I'd been through. I held my son like he was 5 years old again, and I told him what I tell everyone. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about setting yourself free. I forgave Harold a long time ago, not because he deserved it, but because carrying that anger was like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to get sick. I chose to put it down. I chose myself. Harold died in 2015. I didn't go to the funeral. Some people judged me for that. But I'd already mourned that marriage. I mourned it while I was still in it. I had nothing left to give to his memory. What I had left, I was saving for the people who actually loved me. So here I sit, 80 years old, a library of wrinkles on my face, each one earned. My apartment is small and filled with books, stacked on shelves, piled on tables, tucked under the bed. I have a cat named Darcy, because of course I do. I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren who call me Gigi and think I'm the coolest person alive because I let them eat ice cream for breakfast when they visit. I still go to the ocean every year on November 15th, the anniversary of the day I first saw it. I take off my shoes, walk into the water, and talk to James. Sometimes Catherine comes with me, sometimes Anna, sometimes I go alone. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I go. Last week, my granddaughter Sophie, Catherine's oldest, told me she'd been accepted to law school. She's going to be a civil rights attorney. She said, "Gigi, I want to help women like you, women whose voices were stolen." I held her face in my old shaking hands and said, "Baby, my voice wasn't stolen. It was just waiting. It was waiting for exactly the right moment. And this is that moment." I am Margaret Ellen Whitfield. I am 80 years old. I was a farmer's daughter, a trapped wife, a secret reader, a late bloomer, a college graduate, a teacher, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. I have lived 100 lives inside this one life, and I'm not done yet. If you're out there, if you're the woman I was, the girl keeping her mouth shut because someone told her it was safer, I need you to hear me. It is never too late. It is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to open the box in the attic and find out who you were supposed to be. The ocean is waiting for you, sweetheart. All you have to do is walk toward it. This is Margaret, and I'm finally done being quiet. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support helps us bring more stories like Margaret's to life.